Okay, so thus far we've talked about the idea of provoker, taker, hitter operating as a sort of rocks, paper, scissors. So by which I mean each option beats the other option, or beats one other option but loses to the other. So for instance, if I think of my hitter as being scissors and my taker as being rock, if I commit on a hitter and my training partner takes in a strong way, it's easy for him to be able to take his turn back, win the bind, and invariably begin his chase or just hit directly off of his strong taker. In contrast, if my opponent chooses rock and I think of my provoker as being a kind of, or excuse me, paper as being a kind of provoker, then if I can compel my training partner to perform a defensive taker and I provoke, then I can use that instance of motion that I've created within him to continue my chase. Finally, if we think of our paper as our provoker in this metaphor, then if I throw my cut and instead of responding with a strong plow parry, my training partner just immediately thrusts in because my cut is not committed, my failure leaves me vulnerable for that instance of time. And so one of the things that we have to be very careful of is choosing provoker when our training partner has a proclivity to want to hit, either because they're aware of how our tactical game plan is constructed. They know that there are certain moments where we're more likely to throw a provocation or a failed action rather than a committed action, or just because they're unaware and they see a moment where they think, I don't know, maybe I can hit the guy, and they try it, and I'm over here provoking and I'm getting stabbed in the face. So we have to remember that this rocks, paper, scissors is going on. But then I want to think about for a moment the idea of a provoker as being greater and more a deeper idea than the superficial version of a provocation as a failed action, right? So when we think about a failed action, we look at Meyer, he describes it, or he describes a lot of his failed actions in this way, that we move from a gathered posture into an extended posture, and then we gather again for the cut, right? So I'm failing my action, I send it forward, I pull my sword back, and that gives me an opportunity to perform any number of other actions from my withdrawn posture. When my sword is back, I can move to all the lines. When my sword is forward, I'm very limited in what I can achieve. So we think of a failed action as going from a gathered to an extended, back to a gathered, and then we move into our next hitter. That motion, me extending and then pulling my sword back, is an instance of weakening, right? And so that motion affords our training partner an opportunity to take back the vor indes, right? Unlike a chase, so for instance, if I have my sword comported strongly upon my training partner's sword, and I extend, and then he then moves, in this case, that withdrawal is happening inside his strengthening, and so there's no gap there, I can continue my chase. But out in the Zufechten, these actions happen so much faster, it's so much easier for our training partner to take a strong position and to perceive our gathering or our weakening action to take their turn back. All right, so that's the way that we've been thinking about a provoker as a failure. And that's the issue with a failure is that on the one hand, it can extend my chase or it can extend my turn, right? Because I'm adding another offensive action on top of what I can control with time and distance and my advantage. The problem is, because there's a gap in the pressure, that gives my opponent an opportunity to attack me in the preparation or in the gathering. It gives him an opportunity to take the instance of weakness, once he's achieved a position of stillness, to perceive the instance of weakness and attack into it, and either hit or win an advantageous bind and take back his turn or start his own chase. So now I want to think of provoker as something bigger than that. What do I mean? In the case of a failure, I'm looking to perform some kind of action, some kind of motion that compels a quality of action on the part of my training partner. So, move over a little bit. If I begin with my sword on my shoulder, my training partner's sword is weak, I send my sword forward, immediately my action, my initial action, provocation, was meant to be disguised as a hitter, which my opponent perceives as a hitter and responds with the correct rocks, paper, scissors. He responds with a taker. So a failure is an example of me provoking my opponent to take. But there are two other types of actions that my opponent can do. My opponent can take, but he can also hit, or he can provoke himself. And I can move with blade actions or with my body in such a way that compels him to do any number of those actions at any type of instance within the fight. So for instance, if we're bound and I'm strong on my training partner's, or I'm weak on my training partner's sword, my opponent is strong, then from here I can withdraw my sword. That instance of weakening is an instance in which my opponent can work from the knock indes to seize the vor, in this case with a hitting action. So this zucken from a weak position is actually a provocation compelling my training partner to respond with a hitter. That was indes. That was from the knock indes to seize the vor. I could also create conditions in the bind where we can, from stillness, compel our training partner to move to a hitter directly from stillness, so by seizing the vor. For instance, if I take my sword and I cut and I compel him to take, so now he's taken strongly, he's achieved a strong position, we attain an instance of stillness. Now my training partner from here can take his turn back and he immediately strikes into me. And so that's an example of me doing a motion that leaves me in the knock and it compels a particular type of action. Finally, I can compel my training partner to provoke. You know, one of the ways that I can compel my training partner to provoke is just by being in a neutral bind, right? By being in a neutral bind, my training partner knows that the thrust is probably not there, especially if he's already perceived that as he extends his arms, he knows that I'm going to strengthen on his sword. But as we stay in this static position, he knows that he's not going to be able to thrust directly, but he can extend his arms, causing me to strengthen, and then that action be its own provoker, so zucken after that. So he can extend his arms, causing me to strengthen, and he can zucken in this case. And so that would be an example. That offering of a neutral bind is an example of an opportunity to cause him to provoke the action. In this case, he's provoking with his weak thrust, compelling me to strengthen so that he can fly off, or he can zucken and then tag the arm or what have you, right? So in this case, I've demonstrated I'm using my static posture, my neutral bind, to offer him an opportunity to provoke me to strengthen. Another way that I can have him provoke, or that I can compel him to provoke, is by strengthening myself at some distance when he's weak. So if I find that he's weak, if I put my sword on top, I know that. So that would be a hitter. Let's do the provoker.
I was waiting for you to.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, sure. So for instance, like if I'm here, I would stay at a safer distance because I was close. In this case, I was close enough where if I strengthen here and you strengthen, I'm going to get stabbed. But so let's say I pull distance a little bit, so I get to here, and then he knows that that's coming, and then he can stab. So basically, that instance of strengthening, this instance of strengthening is an opportunity for him to know that he doesn't have a direct hitter off of it, but he can create motion. And if I know that my motion is going to result in him behaving in some sort of way, it's going to result in him performing one of those three types of actions, I can start to devise a game plan on how I get there, how I create the conditions that trigger that type of action, and then because I've created those conditions, I know what type of action I can expect, particularly if I see that my training partner is behaving in a reliable way. So he's performing the same types of actions, maybe because I've assessed that he has a proficiency in those types of actions, that I can create those conditions, compel him to move in that way, and then because I'm aware that it's the way that he wants to move, I can be more acutely aware of that response and deal with it more appropriately when it happens. Thanks for watching Historical Fencing Channel content. If you'd like to learn more, check out our Patreon link in the description for detailed, one-on-one, tailored instruction. And don't forget to like and subscribe.